There we go. Now we just need to see some attendees come in. Hello to everyone coming in on the attendee list here. We'll give everyone about 2 minutes or so to continue to filter in before we get started. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started and people can continue to filter in as they come in, but just wanted to say hi everyone and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We will be talking about making data-driven decisions, but my name is Carly Sorensen and I lead our webinar program over here at AgentSync, and I'm very excited to introduce our panelists for today's session. We have Cameron Nordholm here today, who is our head of strategy over at AgentSync, and Chris Cline, who is our executive director, over at ACT. And I'll let them tell a little bit more about themselves before jumping into the session. So Cameron, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Carly, for teeing this up. Excited to be here with Chris and the rest of the AgentSync crew. A little bit about AgentSync. AgentSync is a Denver headquartered software as a service business focused on solving the core of distribution and producer lifecycle management in a single unified, very configurable platform. So AgentSync serves over 200 agencies, MGAs, and carriers across the United States. And I think if you really boil down what we do, it comes down to unifying the experience of onboarding any producer, whether it's an agent or agency, to any line of business in any territory, basically to any product in any territory across the US, and automating that process as much as possible. And all that's fine, but the goal at the end of the day is to really accelerate the producer onboarding experience, help folks get in and get out and get back to working with clients and meeting the risk demands. I myself joined AgentSync 2 years ago. I've spent now just about a decade in the US insurance market, and I previously built a software business called Gainfully, which connected a lot of the life and annuity space together, so broker dealers, carriers, and producers across the United States. Sold that to a private equity firm and actually joined AgentSync in 2020, and since then it's been a fantastic ride, building us from a team of about 60 to a team of over 200, like I mentioned, based out in Denver. You'll hear this sort of sprinkled throughout, but one of the really important things to us as a business and to our leadership and to our entire team is how we show up to the industry. So because we work so closely with all 54 DOIs in different jurisdictions, including Guam, including the Virgin Islands, we really like to give back. And so this partnership is a great example of how we like to participate and as we say, show up to the industry and spread the knowledge that we generate internally as much as possible. Yes, of course, we're a software company. I'll speak a little to that as we talk about data-driven challenges in the webinar here today. But at the end of the day, insurance is kind of a close-knit community as we see it. And so hosting these webinars and working with partners like Chris here is part of how we show up. So I'll pause there. I know Chris and I both have the gift of gab, so I'll hand it over to him for an introduction as well.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And in my career of personal development, I've always had brevity as a goal of things to work on. So that's not because I am good at brevity, but it's because it's going to be one of those lifelong things I need to stay focused upon. But appreciate the opportunity to participate in the webinar today. My name is Chris Cline. I currently lead ACT, which is the Agents Council for Technology, which is one of the many programs the National Big I, IIABA, offers to member agencies around the country. And the gamut of programs we offer, again, this Agents Council for Technology. The goal of that is to bring, in a very neutral and agnostic way, to bring carriers, agents, brokers, wholesalers, MGAs, technology providers, bring everybody together in a way where we truly create a community around key opportunities or issues in the industry that technology can enable. And we have a work group centric model where we get together and try to create insights and education, tools, resources, and webinars being one of those that member agencies and carriers can leverage to gain insights into the way the industry is thinking about technology or being impacted by technology. But across the board, the Big I has diversity efforts, hiring efforts, programs that involve schools and colleges and universities, a phenomenal university for technical insights, all the way through E&O and market access. So it's a very robust set of programs at the national level and in collaboration with each of the state Big I's that you may be familiar with. So a lot of fun being here. Great way to, as Cameron mentioned, sort of give back to the community, because I spent the prior 28 years before joining ACT, which was just a year and a half ago, on the carrier side. Did a ton of different things on the carrier side, but really the bulk of my time, I led a personal lines division for a few states at a regional carrier. And in the last 9 or so years, I was a part of the senior team that led agency distribution, which included the lifecycle work here. So not only just the agency facing roles of interacting through the appointment, prospecting, M&A, and all those types of things, but also some of the back end processes that a company like AgentSync can support. And that's actually how we came to know of each other. And so really grateful that you guys at AgentSync have partnered with ACT, because, as you alluded to, it is about showing up in a different way. Partnering with a Big I or trade associations, kind of a long game, and it is investing in the health of a channel. So it's a little bit different than some strategic partnerships that some folks might participate in. But it means a great deal to have this partnership together with you. And, we have 70 some odd other companies, carriers, and technology providers, many of which are direct competitors. So it's really a cool testimony to how the industry can get together. It's a really small, large industry, I guess it is. And everybody can kind of check their logos at the door when they're involved with ACT, collaborate for the overall benefit of the industry, and then, compete over whatever it is you're competing on the other 364 days out of the year. So appreciate being here and looking forward to this conversation, because data it's one of the top 3 to 5 things our industry is talking about and should be talking about.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Appreciate that. But now let's talk about the data, as Chris mentioned. But today we will be discussing really what the industry problems that we've seen around data, for example, outdated processes or stagnant data, as well as how we might fix those problems by leveraging real-time insights and just overall visibility into the data. And then finally, we're going to talk about how that may impact you as well as other sellers. Just so you guys know, we will have time for a Q&A at the end of this discussion. So please feel free to submit any questions you may have using that Q&A function, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end. But with that, let me pass it back over to Chris and Cameron to get us started.
Cameron, why don't you kick it off and some of the problems that you guys see? You're close to the core problem. In fact, you built your business around a core problem. So I'll stop there.
We did, and I think maybe to pick up on what Carly was saying and sort of further set the table a little bit. I think keeping in mind the audience that we have here today, today what we're really going to be focused on is the intersection and the data problems that exist between, stick with me here, between the agency and the carrier and the agent. But at the end of the day, knowing that the agent is, at the end of the day, every institution, every customer that we work with, and really the whole point of the insurance industry is to empower and streamline the experience of the individual agent or broker, right? And so when we're talking about this, although we're not necessarily going to be focused today, I think in broad strokes, at least I'll speak for myself, in broad strokes on, say, what does a mobile app experience look like? What does a householding experience look like? The problems that we're focused on, in my view and in the view of AgentSync, really impact agent experience in a massive way, which is to say that, to Chris's prompt here, we still have not solved for, as an industry. I'm not talking about AgentSync or AgentSync customers. As an industry, in my view, we have not solved for a very fundamental problem, which is, as an agent, I almost necessarily am working with multiple different carriers. And actually, if you look at the data that we sit on top of at AgentSync, we can see that the lower quartile, right, so the bottom 25% of agents that we are sort of captured within our system work with about an average of a dozen carriers. The upper quartile, right, and we're talking about a universe of hundreds of thousands of US agents, the upper quartile have in excess of 100 different appointments. And so if we consider that data picture and that relationships picture between agents and agencies and carriers and other distributors that are mixed in the middle, we all know the alphabet soup that exists there. What we have is a challenge on both sides. And I like to think of the problems that we are solving for at AgentSync as solving for kind of collective action problems, where if you were to say, if I were to walk into an agency office and talk to an individual agent and say, if I could hand you a magic wand, and also to your operations folks, if I could hand your operations folks a magic wand and they could solve for one of the biggest data problems that they have, it would mean that the data that describes you as an agent could be propagated in real time, with full accuracy to every single partner that you work with obvious things like privacy controls and all the necessary underlying caveats that we need to provide to that. But if we take even that bottom quartile and think about that agent working with a dozen different carriers, what does that mean? That means that banking information is old, licensing information is old. They really don't know at the end of the day, are you ready to sell? Do you want to sell their products? What is your sort of disposition? How are you feeling about them as a partner, right? And if we look at the sort of stack ranked order of the different challenges that the carriers are trying to meet, they're often thinking about it through the lens of products, of commissions, of compensation, right? And what our data shows, and what data from NAILBA and other data, other industry resources across industry see, is that what they actually are looking for, what agents are actually looking for, is ease of doing business. They want to be able to share their data, have it exposed, be accessible to the carriers that they work with, so that they can get back to doing what they love to do, which is helping their clients, right? So at AgentSync, and I think if we look at the broader industry, trying to get our arms around that challenge, which is really complex, really messy, and saying, how do we align incentives so that agents that are trying to do business and trying to access products from the carrier side and meet the needs of their clients, how do we more easily move them through that entire process, keep them ready to sell, have them available and sort of not stubbing their toe on pebbles as they try to meet client needs across their sort of book of business? That's what we're really focused on. I think we can unpack that a bit more, but I don't know, Chris, if you want to add to that picture. I know you've dealt with these very problems on the carrier side specifically, but I think that sort of picture of how we address that foundation, right, of producer, what I would call agent or producer connectivity, is one that is still, it's not there. right? And that data picture is not there, neither on the agency side or the agent side, or on the carrier side.
Yeah, I mean, you stated it very, very well. And, I think that one of the things that's fascinating about this concept, and if we, kind of think about the part of the overall value chain that you've kind of positioned it, we'll focus on agent, producer, agency, carrier. A lot of these conversations, Cameron, I think you would agree, transcend everything. So even if you're thinking about these challenges and the opportunities our industry has, they could also apply to consumer data if you wanted to go down that path. But I was thinking about, what is the problem? Not only is it just, outdated and stagnant data. So, what does that really mean? I think, our industry, one of the built-in blessings and curses of our industry is how long it's been around and how relatively stable the employee base is. And so we've got scenarios where even if you are trying to sort of pivot to a new data strategy in your agency or in your carrier, try to deploy consistent processes around how you gather data, demographic data, producer licensing data, whatever it is for net new, you've probably got a mammoth collection of data for existing producers, or if you go all the way out to the other end, existing customers that have been around for a very, very long time, where you have inconsistent data on them based on when and how they were added to the mix, what data was collected at the time. If you're an agency, if you hired somebody, a producer, account exec, whatever, 15 years ago, what the carrier mix you had at the time needed from you in order to credential and appoint them might be very, very different than what those same carriers ask today. And if you bring on new carriers today. So the problem is that it's incredibly fragmented, very inconsistent sets of data. And some of it was free form back in the day. So it really wasn't even standardized to fit into fields or capabilities to where, that it could be leveraged in mass. I mean, I've seen examples of, and then you get first name, last name different, is it Cameron, or you Cam with one carrier, Christopher, Chris, whatever the same type of thing is. And then, God forbid that somebody changes agencies and goes along, and where's the data go? So there's so many opportunities there to kind of think about that, but really understanding that the vast majority of this has been sitting there for a long time untouched. And so now as we think about how do you make better decisions around it, it's hard when
I want
to please.
Yeah, I want to pick up, Chris, though, on a point you made, which is dealing with the sort of the consistency. I'm not going to use the word stagnation, but the fact that the industry is so consistent, you do see a lot of, and I'll be a little bit, as we say, spicy here. Like there's a little bit of apathy as it comes to technology, which is thinking through. It's often viewed as solving a particular business unit's problem, right? So as underwriting, we're going to include help our loss ratio. It's going to be onboarding. It's going to be one of these sort of pinpoint problems. I know it sounds trite, but every business today is a technology business, right? The question of like, why now? Why does the U.S. insurance industry now need to take seriously shifting to models where you can drive business decisions based on data, right? Which is to say, like today we're not there. Like almost across the board, we are not there, from the largest carrier to the smallest agency. Making data-informed decisions, and we'll talk more about that, is just not truly an option. It may be within certain silos, within certain wells or business units, but across the business, thinking about how you define, for example, a distribution strategy, it's not going to be data-driven. It's going to be instrumentally driven by the sort of affordances that you have, maybe based on feet on the street, or by some pool of technology that you've put in place or on your policy admin system, something like that. And at the end of the day, like it is very difficult from an agent or agency perspective to provide feedback, provide insight, actually react to these things and actually take advantage of them. So all that to say, the question of like, why now? Why is it so critical that every sort of layer of the sort of, distribution layer cake be thinking about data? You are going to be increasingly coming up against companies that are taking that step. You're going to be coming up against competitors who are leveraging a holistic data strategy to accelerate things like distribution growth, distribution efficiency, the quality of user experience for agents and agencies on the carrier side. And increasingly, this is not just a question of, number one, the fundamentals of your business and your ability to make decisions and inform your strategy. It's also going to mean a competitive differentiation and ultimately a competitive disadvantage, right? If you aren't actually building a full data picture that allows you to leverage both decision making and create the experiences that you want to deliver that actually differentiate you in market. We could spill a lot of ink, and a lot of ink has been spilled about the US insurtech market. Everyone likes to go on the public markets and like laugh at where Root is right now from a valuation perspective. But the reality is that there are companies right now, incumbents who have been around for decades, that are looking at the learnings that came out of the insurtech space in terms of quality of experience, the nimbleness of distribution, the sort of aggression with which they went to market, and they're actually taking some really exciting learnings from that. But the only way you can take advantage of that and actually implement those is if you ornament from a technology to a data to an analysis perspective, and then spread that across your business in a way that allows you to make informed decisions. And to be frank, like among the companies that we talk to, and we're sort of at AgentSync constantly sort of looking at the guts, if you will, of large agencies and carriers, almost no one is there. The leaders that are going to run out ahead of the pack, I think are going to surprise people over the coming couple of years. And I think we're looking at a horizon of 1, 2, 3 years where really radical efficiencies can be gained by having your hands around this data and thinking about your staffing model, about your technology model, about your distribution model. So the problems, though, are that very few companies are sort of starting down that path and taking it seriously and thinking about it holistically as well. So, Chris, I'll offer you sort of further thoughts on that, but the problem space is massive. And again, I know it sounds trite, but you have to think about your business as a technology business. And I have a few thoughts on that. I'll hold back for the moment about technology versus service and sort of what this unlocks. But Chris, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We been getting to know each other here over the last few weeks as we prep for this and as the partnership goes on. And I come at this with an agreement about what the problem is. And I think the dynamic about why the industry is where the industry is on the continuum of tech adoption, how quickly we should be going or should have gone is, those are really deeply somewhat esoteric questions around when I try to think about what the core fundamentals of our industry are, which is risk transfer, risk understanding. We don't manufacture widgets and those kind of things. And so those types of and 50 state regulation, probably even more than that when you start to get into the territories and all of that. Oftentimes those, I think, from those outside the industry accuse us of using those as excuses not to adapt and change as quickly as some other business segments. Maybe so. But I also think inside the industry, the incumbents kind of look at it. And when you look at the current operating results really across the industry and the actions that carriers are starting to take right now to correct, some really unfavorable operating results, how important fundamentals are. And so I look at this through two lenses. I don't know what the distraction was. I mean, obviously the natural catastrophes are out there, the pandemic issues of supply chain, the economics around the current situation with the stock market and the returns they get from investment income, all those kind of things are there right now. But trying to remain really focused on what the core fundamentals of our industry are. And now we're in this weird spot right now where we might have been somewhat distracted by all these technology shiny objects out there, trying to figure out where to play and what to do. And data is one where I come back to, and I say, that's probably one where our industry could have and should have put more chips 5, 10, 15 years ago, because some of the things we're working through right now, maybe they would not have been completely averted, but would certainly be enhanced from helping get us through this with more robust data. And whether that's producer data or risk and loss data, actuarial data, whatever that kind of stuff is. And so your point about maybe being left behind or at a competitive disadvantage, I mean, I do think data-driven firms, it might not be as sexy and romantic as some of the other, sort of insurtech, you use that word, solutions are out because they don't always drive top of the funnel the way that, some people like to sell. But man, when you really get inside and dive deep into what our industry is all about, data.
Yeah.
It's always been about data. It's about who can come up with a better ability to predict risk, who can come up with a more accurate pricing model, who can find something that becomes better around risk selection. And then similarly now, when it comes to the producer, agent, and carrier, how do we minimize the expense and the inefficiencies that come from what was probably historically this all-to-all matrix, every producer to every operating company, to getting really focused on where the value can be added and expertise can be gained and relationships can be forged, so that the vision of all of those organizations come together in a way where there's clarity around expectations and outcomes, and we can do what we're supposed to do, which is select the appropriate risk, price it right, and take care of our clients.
Before we turn the page, I just wanted to offer just a quick anecdote, Carly. I know we probably need to change the slide here, but to your point, Chris, about the fundamental nature of having your hands around the data picture for your organization. All of these different technology trends, right? And I think we behoove ourselves to talk a little bit about some of the generative AI and LLM models that are being built right now and how those interface with it. But let me take that and put it in the same bucket as, say, blockchain technology 3 years ago, which is not to say that it's not relevant or that it's not important or that it couldn't have really meaningful impact on our industry. But to give you an example, I was talking to a multinational, the head of strategy, the head of product, and a few other executives from a multinational insurance carrier, does business across Europe and the United States. And one of them, this is a year and a half ago or so, one of these executives came up to me and asked me, what is your blockchain strategy for AgentSync, for looking across, say, a customer's data? And my question to them was, how much confidence do you have in the accuracy and the quality of the data that you have today? And the reaction was, well, of course, it's a mess, right? It's everywhere. It's over here. It's over there. We have mismatched names and policy numbers and writing. It was all across the board. And I said, okay, so you want to take a bunch of low quality data and put it into a technology where you can't alter or modify that data in the future and effectively lock yourself into having bad data forever. Do we think that's the most important step that we could take at this point? Or do we think we should be focused on data quality and building a data lake that we can leverage in the future? And they said, well, okay, maybe blockchain's a little bit further down the road. I said, yeah, I think that might be right. But anyway, with that, I know, Carly, we gotta move through our agenda here.
No, you guys are fine. I think you did it's a very clear way of setting up like what really is the risk behind not thinking data first. So I guess that leads us into our next segment of really how do we fix this problem? So I'll leave it back to you guys.
That's always the question, isn't it? Right. It feels like at our industry events, and I'm probably guilty as charged. The digital type presentations or keynote type stuff I give, we love to talk about the problem and get people kind of thinking about it, but a lot of folks that might be watching today are really looking for kind of tactical ways to move forward. And from my perspective, I'm maybe less equipped to talk about specific tools. We're very fortunate, obviously, to be on the webinar today with AgentSync, and there are other partners that interact with ACT that are gurus in data management and data strategy. And so choosing the right one is certainly up to the agency. But I got exposed many years ago and probably didn't even fully grasp the power of it, but really have started to rally around the notion of people, process, and technology lately. And maybe I'll let Cameron kind of elaborate for sure, but definitely on the technology side. But one of the things it's really hit me on these types of transformative changes in any organization of any size. I mean, you start talking about making a pivot in how you want to collect and manage and utilize data, it's pretty significant in even the smallest firms, where a lot of people were somewhat permitted to gather data however they want. Not every piece of data is ultimately required to get something done. So why are we gathering it? So change management is kind of a buzzword, but it's a really important thing to focus on. And starting with getting your teammates, your staff really centered up on the importance of data and what it means to your organization. I mean, we could start to rally down the fact that organizations with better quality data, the ability to articulate what their results look like, they sell for more, especially if you think about an agency, they're just simply worth more money. Usually have better talent attraction and talent retention. And that's not inherent. Well, the value might be because of the data, but it's not necessarily because the data is better. It's because what type of an employee experience that creates, which you alluded to earlier, Cameron. And if you think about most employees, I think wake up in the morning and come to work or turn on their laptop and work, largely just wanting to know what's expected and have the tools and resources to do it, have the support to get it done correctly, and then be adequately compensated for doing that. And so I've always been a proponent that if you've got more than one person that shares the same job description, if they're not already doing the job the same way, no piece of technology laid on top of that is really going to solve the issues. So when you start talking about how do you fix it, like start talking about it with your staff and the importance of data, and start to think about it in terms of what will better data mean to them in terms of how their day as an employee of your organization will be improved, not so much by the better data, but by the processes that enable you to have better data. And then sort of the downstream impact of what you can do now with that data: provide better customer service, save money, get more done in less time, all of those kinds of things. So the people in the process part of that are something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I don't always think get the same level of attention as they deserve at many technology oriented events.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll second everything you just said, and I'll just offer kind of yes and that, and say, in my experience, one of the best ways to orient the business and probably most importantly the team to solving for these challenges is to attach the value to a business outcome, right? And so coming in with a clear, because number one, change management is critical. It's a huge topic. It's also very hard, right? So in that vein, you got to be careful. I'm sorry for the corporatism, but you don't want to boil the ocean, right? You don't want to come in and try to reinvent your data strategy top to bottom in a 1 year. Let's just fix it in 12, 18 months and we're all done with it. Move on. Now we're a data-driven organization. No, it's going to be a constant process, building, iterating, reinventing the organization from the inside out. And so a couple of things. I mean, number one, I think the technology really needs to be downstream of what the business objective is. So oftentimes, I mentioned blockchain or talking about AI or whatever those things are. They're neat, right? And you'll certainly hear lots of speakers at conferences get up on stage and say, like, we used Chat GPT to, solve underwriting in California somehow. And it's, wow, like this is amazing innovation. That's fine. It might work for one organization, but odds are they started with the boring stuff, which is bringing your leaders together, bringing the folks on the ground together, and identifying, number one, what does the business need to do next year? What downstream objectives are going to roll up to achieving those objectives? And then how do we leverage technology to do it, right? Knowing that we can't do everything at once. Like we're all, as a business, your resource, time, and capital constrained. And at the end of the day, you got to pick where you're going to invest. So defining first those business objectives and holding those up as number one, things that your team can rally to, right? And I think, Chris, you alluded to this, which is at the end of the day, I said every business is a technology business, and that's true. But you're also an insurance business, and what I mean by that is leveraging technology to streamline the things that need to be streamlined, that really computers are great at, right? Repetitive, data entry, replication, automation. All of those things are really good for computers to do. What you as an agent or your agency or your operations or frontline staff are able to do are everything else that matters so much in this business, from selling to claims and everything in between, right? Thinking about technology and data as a way to streamline everything that, like I said, computers are great at, so that the value add is very, very clear, and that you can maximize your available capital and people and resources to focus on that space, so that you stand head and shoulders above any other agent or agency. From a carrier perspective, you show up in the right way, where maybe for 99% of policies, or 99% of, say, agency onboarding, it's all automated. But when something goes wrong or something goes sideways, you have a team that's ready to jump on it and handle it in no time flat. So it's really about prioritization, is what I'm saying. Solving it is going to involve identifying those North Stars, making sure that you align the business to it, and then building from there up. And I think the exciting part of that is there are so many parts of the insurance business today that can be automated, that really can be data-driven. I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of what we would call FUD, kind of in the technology industry. I think it's a military crossover too. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? That if we start implementing technology, that poof, ops jobs go away. That poof, like, my friend over here is going to be without. Really, what we see an opportunity across our customers is they want to, as much as possible, move every possible person into revenue and support value-added activities. And if you were to ask me where we are today versus where we can be in leveraging data to achieve that, I think we're on like the 5-yard line, and I'm talking about our own 5-yard line, not our competition's. So there's a long path to go down. But fixing it will be technology driven. But again, to point to this idea about prioritization, I also want to note, just from a sort of technology building perspective, one thing that I often offer to our customers is to bring your team together. When you're thinking about what problems you want to solve, think about atomizing the kind of core components of value, right? So for a carrier, that's going to be products, that's going to be capital, that's going to be distribution, right? For the agency, it's going to be much more about service. It's going to be about quoting and binding and the underwriting process, and making sure that you've got a clean path to go from zero to issued at the end of the day. And breaking down the component parts of that journey and identifying where there's data replication, where there's data integrity, or skew that occurs, right? So maybe you have multiple sources for the same data point. And then thinking through the custody of information you're getting, both from your agents and from the insured, and walking that through the entire life cycle, and then using that life cycle for your agency in the way that you're adding value, to then think about what technologies you select. Maybe that's a vendor, maybe it's a fundamental technology, maybe you want to build something, maybe you want to grab something off the shelf, maybe it's some combination thereof. That's actually, to relate it to AgentSync and kind of our journey, that's how we tend to work with agencies. Is we don't actually walk in with a super opinionated view about how they should run their business. What we'll do is work with them to understand how they run their business today, identifying those gaps with onboarding and lifecycle management and sort of data integrity, and then meeting them where they are. Right. I think that's a big thing that gets missed. And that's, I think, where, to kind of go back to my little dig at the insurtechs, that's where the insurtechs fell down, is they didn't really sort of respect the knowledge and the expertise that have been built up in this industry across hundreds of thousands of professionals for the last, for the history of time, right?
Right.
And so without walking and understanding the industry, a lot of them fell flat on their face. So fixing it, again, needs to start with a North Star. And I think, just to echo what Chris said, people, process are super important, and getting everyone in the business aligned to what you're trying to achieve, right? That business outcome, maybe it's more higher touch service, maybe it's a faster process to issuance, whatever that looks like. Getting them aligned to that first that's the biggest step to take.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe just to kind of tie a ribbon on this one, or that notion around the North Star. One of the things that I've become a fan of, and the theme here is that we're talking about is knowing really what you're trying to accomplish with your business first, and I love to refer to Simon Sinek's why. Start with your why, get that stuff laid out. But one of the things I've been more recently exposed to, and this is not my idea, so it was something I heard somebody say, but if you pull your staff into an office and say, hey, we're going to try to become more data driven, you trigger some of those emotions, Cameron, that you alluded to, like, uh-oh, what does that mean? Even if the outcome could be a ridiculously more fulfilling job for them. But, there's stigma attached to these types of things. So I heard somebody once say, don't start with like what you're like, you want to be transparent, but start with just asking your staff, like, what are your pain points? And then it's their feedback. They're helping build it. And invariably, I don't care what business you're in, you're going to hear things like, I've got to go to multiple places to get the stuff I need to do my job. I don't have the same information for all the clients, those kind of things, or it's in different spots and it's fragmented and this system's slower. So you're going to have very tactical answers from your staff that are very real, probably come with emotion. And you just say, our goal is to figure out how do we make those barriers and obstacles to getting our work done and doing what we're supposed to be doing, to bring our business to have it be more successful and to help our customers. If you start there, then, the data likely exposes itself as one of the things that need to be addressed. There could be some other things too. But then you can start to let them be a part of the journey with you. And I think that is sometimes missed. Usually it's a top down, hey, we're going to be a data driven thing. Here's what we're going to do. We need a focus group and we're going to try to solve our data problems. You've kind of put the staff on guard already. We're on edge. And so if you kind of, it's not deceitful. I think it's just a way of trying to create an open and collaborative way. And you might be wrong, right? As the leader of the organization, you might have some flawed assumptions about what needs to be solved.
You probably are.
Yeah. And
so,
but it might help prioritization, which was your point earlier. That's really where I was going to circle this thing back to. Like, you have business needs, you're trying to run a business, those types of things are incredibly valuable, but your staff every single day lives and breathes what's working well and what's not working well in your organization. And they want to be heard. Nearly all of them want to be heard.
I think just to sort of frame it a slightly different way, but I think saying the same thing, Chris, when you think about a technology project and identifying, so number one, gathering requirements and understanding what the pain points are and what that journey looks like and mapping that out. That's sort of step number one. So you have a unified picture of what problem you're trying to solve, right? But in solving that problem, your staff, I'd like to go back to your point about people and process, your staff, in a lot of ways, you should be thinking about conceptualizing them as an internal customer, right? So thinking about them alongside obviously the insured and the personal and commercial customers that you're supporting, thinking about them as the engine within the business that you're trying to service and optimize and support, allows them to, number one, feel not just included, right, Chris, to your point, but also as like a stakeholder in developing the actual solution, right? Not a consumer, but actually the customer of the solution. And I think, the best run organizations I've seen have that really tight partnership. And it even goes back to the sort of Toyota model, right? Where a lot of the best ideas are going to come off the assembly line. A lot of the best ideas are actually going to be, generated by those who are rewarded for identifying inefficiencies, right? Even if if they're thinking very narrowly, think about it as job protection, thinking about it through the lens of how am I part of this bigger picture, and how do I surface opportunities to help the business grow? The cliche thing, think like a CEO, right? Down to every participant. But it does involve creating the right incentive structure. And so conceptualizing them as a customer and giving them a seat at the table as an equal alongside other, what we would call in sort of technology product world, different personas that you're trying to serve, is a great way to sort of bring them along and show that they have, they're not just going to be a beneficiary, but they are a real stakeholder in developing the actual solution.
Hashtag bring back the suggestion box.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you guys are saying, especially about the human first approach with everything. And it does lead into our next point of really, what does that mean for you and other sellers, the people who are actually being the end users in this case? So I'd love to hear a little bit more expansion on that.
I feel like we've covered a lot of that, but I think it's at the end of the day, whether it's a data strategy or whatever technology is, it's obviously to achieve a business outcome. And so we are running businesses, to be like sort of terse about it. These aren't charity cases, and not every employee gets to have their way. None of us do really. Even CEOs of large companies have boards of directors that they report to. So, but what's in it for you is a greater sort of overall experience for your staff if you treat them like customers, the whole 9 yards. Likely greater margins, better margins, or at least more predictable margins is probably a better way of saying it, which ultimately yields greater business value. And I don't know what more sort of better trifecta you could frame to have happy and highly retaining employees, to make more money, and to have your business be worth more at the end of the day. There's a lot of stuff that fits inside all of those, but kind of say that to kind of turn it over to Cameron and let him elaborate.
Yeah.
We'll riff on this a little bit.
Well, I think better margins is absolutely an outcome for the business. I think one of the key challenges that we are focused on at AgentSync is how we help our customers attract and retain talent, right? And so we think about U.S. insurance market and the fact that among agents, right, the average age is north of 60 now. The retention is often less than a year. The question is, how do we make insurance a more exciting path to building a career? And if we think about what data and what technology bring to that picture, it's multifaceted. But to go back to my point about setting objectives, if our objective is to retain and first of all attract, and secondly retain talent, we need to be thinking about what experiences we deliver to agents, to sellers within the agency context, through the digital experiences that they're used to, both for them and for their clients, right? The value of agents is in personal relationships and the ability to understand the products, the risk profile, the needs of their customers, and how they show up in the future, right? And how they present this in the future, I think is going to be very different. And I think that actually the opportunity in leveraging data to understand householding, to understand where there might be underinsured, where it's different opportunities across your book of business, is going to really focus on then how do you leverage that data to accentuate the human part. Something that is very much missing, I think, today is number one, treating agents like human beings, right, as opposed to rows in a spreadsheet. Number two, thinking about the insured, whether a business owner, whether they're head of a household, how we treat them like human beings and show up for them in more ways. And so what that really, this goes back to a point that I've made, it really comes down to how do we remove the busy work, the core operations, sort of challenges associated with just running an agency or an agent business, and get back to what we all want to do, which is help clients with mitigating risk. I actually can tie this back to a personal experience I had, which is I live in Northern California, and I actually had a giant tree fall, just to keep it short, a big oak tree fall from my neighbor's yard directly into ours. Kind of scary. Kids play back there. Got two little ones. And I'm not going to talk about the carrier who I worked with, but it was a big one. And so I was expecting my expectations were very, very modest. But the adjuster who showed up for them, the desk adjuster, was one of the most lovely, empathetic people who I've honestly met and ever done business with. And I think that the opportunity to think about insurance in this value-added way, and actually I like it, this is more particular to P&C, but I think of insurance as an emergency service, right? This is actually something that complements all of the different things that we often take for granted as a foundation of our society. And we're going to often meet our clients, our customers on some of their worst days. So being able to have the time, the space, the presence of mind to focus on that and deliver something that makes them a client forever and creates opportunities like this, where I'm sharing this anecdote. I'm going to be agnostic because I was told to check my logos at the door. But to create those sort of viral word of mouth moments that help you grow your book just organically are the ones that I think really sit at the heart of unlocking this sort of data-driven picture. So, for AgentSync, what does that mean? That means that for agencies, it means tracking all the producer details to make sure that you have like green lights and you're ready to sell, right? So you never have to worry about whether you have the right license or appointment, policies enforced, all these different check boxes are checked, which means that all of your attention is focused on your book and on new opportunities. And, I was speaking to an adjuster experience, but it's just as much about understanding not just, what's the loss policy that we need to put in place, but, helping, a homeowner understand like not just what they can do if something happens, what they can do to mitigate risk. Like, how do we think about being more proactive, right? Creating space and creating ultimately that value added sort of surface area within your business, within your agency, right? And so those are the things that get me excited about the future, taking data and technology and kind of like masking a lot of the things that we now think about as the job of delivering on insurance, so that it shows up in a way that's more akin, and I know this is a little controversial, but more of an emergency service, something that's more akin to like the fire department and showing up, and like everyone loves firefighters, right? Like, how do we think about ourselves as showing up in a whatever the insurance version of the big rubber boots and the hat is, to get, not just to get the kitten out of the tree, but to help our customers really do some meaningful, feel more safe, more comfortable, more secure in their lives. So I hope that doesn't come across as too touchy-feely, but I actually feel pretty passionate about that. And I think that actually humanizing our industry is the thing that's going to help us, again, attract and retain that talent that we need to sort of grow and transform the industry so it shows up in a way that's appropriate for 2023 and beyond, right? Because I think we all know that there's a little bit of dust to sort of brush off the book of insurance, if you will, to get that talent in the door, retain it, and to grow our business. Chris, I've gone down the firefighter route now, but
that's all right. No, we're trying to use data and technology to create sort of like a bionic, agent, so to speak, right? Because you still got the human element there, but yet with some superpowers there. And I'm not going to reiterate everything you said, because I agree, with so much of what you said about letting humans be humans and those kinds of things, and adding value where humans can. And so I guess two things here as we think about closing. First of all, humans don't add much value today by typing the same address 5 times. They type it once and then get on to adding value and doing consultative type things, or vice versa on the carrier side, right? If you're talking to agencies and trying to help them solve their problems. So, in an agency, if you hire a producer and you got to send off, all the credentialing stuff to 100 carriers, typing that 100 times doesn't make that person in your office a better employee. It just means they can type. So how using the capabilities at your disposal. But, this sort of spot right now, and and a lot of the things I do, sometimes it feels like it's a little bit too doom and gloom, and I know that's not really I don't think that's the vibe we're giving off here, but we are starting from a position of strength. And so leveraging some of the big eye insights, the market share data, Agents Universe study. I mean, the most recent study from last year shows there are actually more independent agencies than there were before, and market share in both personal lines and commercial lines has gone up. And again, this really, really current financial situation may or may not still cause us to hold water, but most agencies, by and large, statistically, their margins are up and their values are at an all-time high. Mm-hmm. So, all of those types of things, and particularly think about the customer market share. All of that happened through a global pandemic and a point in time where some of that maybe less guided insurtech investment dollars that Cameron alluded to, some of it was labeled with us in their crosshairs and all of us listening.
Absolutely.
Today. Yeah. And through all of that, untold billions of dollars, in a global pandemic, customers are choosing the independent agency channel. So what does that say, right? They value the human thing we can offer, the trusted advice, the consultation, the risk consultation, and those types of things. So we're coming from a relatively strong position. I think it's now about how do you maximize that and become even more efficient and be able to go get more market share from parts of the distribution network that can't necessarily offer that.
Awesome.
I think
Well,
it was $25 billion or more, Chris, with putting the crosshairs on independent agents. And now everyone loves agents. It's amazing.
It is, right? The agents are still here. And
Yep.
I say this somewhat cheesily, but I think it's a fact. I don't know of an independent agency that went out of business because they didn't deploy the newest piece of technology.
Mhm.
Which is, it's some people view that as a negative thing, right? It's the downside of our industry. It allows us to be slow, but maybe there's something to the pace of our industry. When you think about what you said, like at the end of the day, the firefighter not only has to show up, but the firefighter has to have the capacity to put the fire out. So in our industry, the claims adjuster has to show up not only to make you feel better about the tree that fell, but to actually be financially stable enough to write the check. And if that doesn't happen, none of us have jobs.
Very true.
Exactly.
Sorry, I know you're trying to see if there's any questions, and I know we're probably right up
Oh
against
yeah, we're
time,
just
but-
coming up on time, but we
Yeah.
definitely have time to at least address one of the big ones that came through. But I have to say thank you guys. That was incredibly insightful and much appreciated. But one of the questions that we did have come through that could be interesting is, what if my organization works with legacy systems, and what does that mean for our data? Would we need to find something more compatible?
Want to go first?
Well, that's so I'm going to assume we're talking about an agency lens here. So I'll just speak from experience, right? So anecdotes I think are always helpful to sort of move the conversation along. So, let's say that you're stuck with like a on-prem or otherwise non-cloud based, say, AMS solution. I think solving for that remains the same, right? Like you need to define the business of, so backing up, technology is downstream of business challenges or business problems, right? So thinking technology first or solution first is never going to be the right way to sort of, peel the egg, if you will. You want to start with number one, where is our business today? Where does it need to be tomorrow? And identifying what the gap, the distance between here and there is. The building a roadmap that is technology based between where you are and where you need to go is where you start. You bring the people in, you build towards a picture of what that solution might look like in terms of problems solved. And the problems that you solve for are, some of them may be technology, some of them might be operations, some of them might be people, it might be getting the right butts in the right seats in some cases. But the rolling up to a particular technology solution is never where I would start. As shiny as it can be, and I think Chris sort of spoke to this, focusing first on the kind of boring business picture of what problem you're trying to solve, what you're trying to optimize for, and prioritizing that is where all things start. Data supports it. Data can support your decision making, but a technology decision around a legacy system should wait until you've defined what your priorities are.
I would completely echo that. I mean, if you have an old rusty hammer, buying a nail gun doesn't necessarily help unless you have a blueprint in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, I think that even with, and I could go off on a tangent on my opinion of the word legacy, because I'm writing a book called The Inertia of Legacy. But we'll just say these incumbent systems that, that don't necessarily create the flexibility. I agree with what you said, and it kind of circle back to people and process. I would always suggest that unless it just won't turn on in the morning and it crashes all the time, to look at your internal processes and performance management expectations of your staff. Sometimes things can be solved, at least as a patchwork to the future, just by making sure that your processes are tight, people are following them, that they still make sense, you're collecting data in the right way. And so you can start to do some of those basic things that you would have to do even if you made a new technology installation anyways. You can start to do those now. Now, you might not have the superpowers at the end because of some older systems, but getting the data right and creating clear expectations about what you want your staff to be doing on the collection and then the execution side with the data can sometimes go a long way to moving the needle in the short term.
Awesome answer. Thank you both. And did want to call out here that I did attach a few resources if anyone is interested in learning a little bit more about what we've talked about today. But just wanted to thank everyone for engaging with us throughout the discussion. And of course, thank you to Chris and Cameron for your time today. You guys have been incredibly insightful and helpful. And we are very excited to see this conversation continue throughout the industry.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Love talking with you, Cameron. It was great.
It's been a pleasure, Chris. Thanks everybody for attending, and appreciate Carly, the hosting here today.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you again.